So this is the post-National Signing Day edition of the OUinsider.com podcast. I am joined by OUI staff writer Colin Kennedy, who is gracious enough to hang out and talk about this 2020 class with me. Colin, how you doing, man?
I'm good, doing well, my man. I'm excited to talk some ball. It's been a minute.
Yeah, right. And we're going to probably get into the XFL stuff later this week. I know you're going to be down covering the Dallas Renegades inaugural game against the Battlehawks. I'm excited about that too.
Man, it's going to be such a fun weekend down in Arlington. I've been really having a good time covering the practices and talking to Coach Stoops and the rest of those former Sooners. I can't wait, but I know we got a lot of recruiting talk to get to, as of course you mentioned, National Signing Day just wrapping up.
Yeah, man. So I want to take a national view of this first because Oklahoma is a national brand. So please indulge me as I go through this story that I just posted to OUinsider.com. If you are interested in reading it or sharing it, I would appreciate it. So the Southeastern Conference has proven to be the most dominant league in college football for nearly 30 years, dating back to Gene Stalling and his 1992 Alabama Crimson Tide National Championship. In that span of time, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Florida, and Tennessee have joined the Gators, or I should say joined Alabama, with at least one national title. In that span, only Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Texas have won a national title, if you want to go back to the earliest formation of the Big 12. And while many would be right to point out much of the success in the SEC has been attributed, and should be, to Nick Saban and the dynastic Crimson Tide he's built, that kind of misses the point, right? The Tide is dominant, or has been, because the strength of the conference is not just recruiting, but development of those elite recruits. And if we take a look at this, 3 of the top 5 and 7 of the top 10 spots in the 2020 national team rankings go to SEC teams. That's, anybody could see that. If you dig a little bit further, you see that 11 of the 14 teams in the SEC finished inside the top 30 in the national rankings, meaning 2-10 Arkansas with losses to Western Kentucky and San Jose State finished 15 spots ahead of Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State at 45th, and that was the 4th best class in the Big 12. The 4th best class in the SEC is Texas A&M, and they finished number 6 nationally, right? And it gets worse, right? As 5 teams in the Big 10 finished inside the top 30, right? That's just 3 for the Big 12. And then the Big 12 signed 25 fewer recruits, 4-star recruits, than the Big 10. The Big 10 signed 65, the Big 12 signed 40. And then if we just want to take the elite prospects, 15 of a possible 35 stars signed with the SEC, according to the Composite, and the ACC signed 5, the Big 10 signed 4, the Pac-12 signed 4, and the Big 12 signed 1. That means Clemson with 5, Georgia with 4, Alabama with 4, LSU with 3, Ohio State with 3, Oregon with 3, and A&M with 2 all signed more 5-star players than the entire Big 12. And Washington, Maryland, South Carolina, and Florida each signed as many 5-star players as the entire Big 12 conference. And then you talk about national recruiting titles. Alabama's got 8 of 10, and Georgia has 2 of the last 3. So we go back to the Big 12, and we'll see, yeah, Texas finished with the best recruiting class in the conference again for the 3rd year in a row, while Oklahoma's won 5 straight championships. Now, we know that Texas recruits well, but they develop like, a bunch of roses trying to grow in a dank basement with no light. They just don't develop them. Meanwhile, Oklahoma has a different problem, right? It's, yeah, cool, you won 5 straight Big 12 championships, but at some point that feels like being All-State in Rhode Island if you can't beat an SEC team in the 2 most important postseason games. So that was the take, Colin, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say or what you think about that.
Well, I think it's an incredibly valid one, but I just think we have to admit to ourselves that the Big 12 Conference will probably never out-recruit the SEC just for a number of factors. I mean, location, prowess, overall impact and branding, it all favors the Southeastern Conference. But you also are right onto something. Just the way that the SEC is able to out-recruit so many other top-tier programs like in Oklahoma, Texas, even though their on-field product may not necessarily indicate that. But I also look to like an Ohio State or Michigan. Just think about this. As we know, I am a Texas guy, born and raised in the state, and to me, one of the more telling things is just within the state rankings. You look at it, I mean, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the top 6 in the state of Texas, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite rankings, did not end up in the Big 12. And it would be all 6 if Zach Evans had signed somewhere.
Right.
So that's startling to me. Like the state of Texas is the recruiting hotbed for the Big 12 Conference, correct? I think it's a safe assumption.
Yes.
But now when you're losing your hotbeds in recruiting, a Texas, maybe some Oklahoma players that are now starting to explore other options, it's startling to see how the Southeastern Conference has distanced itself from so many of the other members of the Power Five. And I don't know that that's a mountain that any other team will be able to climb just because of the state of college football and the way that this thing is panning out on the recruiting trail.
Right. And I think you also bring up a valid point when you talk about the branding and where you can go to get players, because I've been very fond of taking a look at where players are coming from. And Florida produces the most blue chip recruits, that's 4 and 5 stars, and NFL players of any state, right? Georgia had more blue chips than California for the first time with 25 to 24. And Texas is always a monster, but it is not a monster in the way that many people think. You know, if you take a look at the number of kids that play high school football in the state of Texas and the number of kids that play high school football in the state of Oklahoma, and then you juxtapose that with how many of those kids sign letters of intent to play college football at any level, Oklahoma does a better job at 3.8%, and Texas signs about 2.7%. So just taking that number into account and knowing that Texas is not as great as it thinks it is, many of us think that Texas football is the best football that there is, and that's just proven not necessarily to be true. And then when you go down there and you can't win, when you have kids that are going to A&M that play in the Southeastern Conference, when you have kids that are going to Louisiana or Florida, like Princely Human choosing Florida over Baylor or Texas is a big deal. It's a big deal. You know, I get that you can go to Arizona to go get Bijan Robinson, but it was a bigger deal to me that they got Kelvonte Dixon out of Carthage, because you need that kid, 1, in this conference, and you need him 2 to stay in the state, and he was no guarantee to do that.
No, and I just want to see now how the Big 12 reacts. Like, I know that there's starting to be a stronger emphasis, as you mentioned, on recruiting players from other states to come in because, as you mentioned, and I'll full on admit it, I mean, the state of Texas, it has the supposed prowess of being the best high school football you can find. But as someone who grew up around it, I still believe that Georgia or Florida are putting out just as good, if not a marketably better product at the end of it all. So I need to see how the Big 12 Conference combats the issue that we're currently discussing. Will there be more of an emphasis put on West Coast guys? Do they feel confident enough that they can draw away those Florida recruits? I know that Missouri has been a top-tier producer of talent recently for a number of different positions, but even the state of Missouri, which is technically kind of in that Big 12 region because of the fact that Missouri's gone to the SEC and Ohio State's become the power that it is, Big 12 is losing out on those guys as well. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves is not, can the Big 12 make up the distance in recruiting to the SEC conference? It's how do they then establish their own path to build stronger play on the field? Because it's one thing to get the level of player in the recruiting rankings, but I mean, we talked about Texas' lack of player development. I mean, heck, A&M is one of the most underachieving programs in all of sports. Tennessee, a lot of them in there as well. I don't have particular much fondness for either of those programs, mainly because of the waste of talent that goes in. So knowing that, how does the Big 12, I guess, put more of an emphasis on player development? Because you're just never going to beat out the SEC in terms of recruiting power, so to say.
Right. And setting that aside for just a second, because I believe that I can go out and I can win kids no matter where I am. I believe that. That said, Clemson is located in what we geographically know as SEC country, right? So going to Georgia to get kids, going to Florida to get kids is right there in their wheelhouse, and Dabo Swinney knew that, and he's built a product around it, right? I mean, so much so that Deshaun Watson is a star in the NFL, and he had told people, I never thought I was going to play football in the state of Texas. Tells you a lot about where he was going to play his college football, regardless of whether or not he was picking Clemson. right? And we're talking about development. One of the best things to ever happen to the Big 12 was Matt Rule, because he was able to take a bunch of kids that nobody thought could play, or not nobody. I don't want to work in absolutes here. Enough people didn't think could play that they ended up on what we all believe was a piss poor Baylor football team, and was really trying to bring itself back out of the dark. And he did that with the help of Joey McGuire and Jeff Nixon. I mean, they built an outstanding product based entirely around the idea of, we will develop the kids that we can get. Not the kids that want to be here. I hate that phrase. But the kids that we can get, right? If we can get Charlie Brewer, we're going to turn him into a player. And before the concussions, I was very fond of saying that's the best pro-style quarterback in this league. Like, I had more faith in him succeeding in the NFL level than I had any other quarterback, and that included Jalen Hurts. Did you want to follow up on that?
No. I think you're right on brand. I also mentioned, like, Brock Purdy is probably just on the outside looking in, but outside of that, I mean, you're completely correct. Charlie Brewer was definitely one of the better pro-style quarterbacks in the conference, and it is incredible. You mentioned the Baylor product and what they were able to do. I think you're right on brand with this take.
And give Matt Rule what Texas A&M had, they probably win a national championship.
Oh, for sure.
Right,
man, it is unbelievable how terrible that program is at player development. I'm going to get heated about that, man. Oh, my goodness.
Well, I mean, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, because they're also still my pick for Zach Evans' landing spot, and they have been, even before the Georgia thing became true, I was like, he'll end up at A&M at some point. And now it seems like he's going to be there as a freshman. That's a separate topic.